Welcome back to another very exciting tutorial here at the PhotoshopTrainingChannel.com. My name is Jesus Ramirez, and you can find me on Instagram at JRFromPTC. In this video, I'm going to show you 5 Photoshop tricks that you did not know. Probably. This is actually part 2 of my Photoshop tricks series. Part 1 was one of the most popular videos on this YouTube channel, and a lot of people requested a second part. So this is what this video is all about. And if you missed the first video, just look at the description down below. There's going to be a link to it there. And just like in the first video, I'm going to ask you to leave a comment down below simply telling me how many of the tricks you actually did know and how many you didn't know. Okay, let's get started with the first Photoshop trick. This trick is going to help people who are doing compositing. To illustrate how it works, I have this very simple composition. I wanted to keep things simple and just focus on the technique. So we have this group that only has the model inside it, and we have a background layer. When you're compositing, sometimes you want to match the elements in the foreground to the background, and that means adding adjustment layers to help you match those two together. So in this case, we might want to add an adjustment layer to help us match the foreground color to the background color. So we can add a color balance adjustment layer and maybe add a little bit of yellow, maybe add a little bit of red, but notice what happens once we start adding these colors. This adjustment layer affects the entire image. And you're probably thinking, well, why don't you just create a clipping mask so that the adjustment layer only affects the model? And yes, we can definitely do that. We can click on this button here or press Ctrl-Alt-G, Command-Option-G on the Mac to create a clipping mask. And at this point, any changes that we make to this adjustment layer will only affect the layer right below it, which is the model in this case. Now, the problem comes into play when you have multiple objects in a composite that you want to apply the same adjustment layer to. So if I click on the model layer and press Ctrl-J, Command-J on the Mac to duplicate, now we have 2 models. And I'm just going to press Ctrl-T, Command-T on the Mac to transform, and right-click on the layer and flip it horizontally. So now we have twin sisters. In a more complex composite, it won't be the same duplicated image. You might have multiple layers. But to keep things simple, we're just going to work with these 2 layers. Now, if you want to apply the same color balance to the layer below it, you could, of course, duplicate this adjustment layer and clip it to the model, but that would just create multiple adjustment layers that you really don't need. And you can, of course, Control, Command, click on the layer thumbnails to create a selection around our models. On the second one, I held Control and Shift to add to the selection while clicking on the thumbnail. And then we can just delete the layer mask and add a new layer mask, which will add the adjustments to both models. It's not working right now because we have a clipping mask. If I unclip that mask, I'm going to hold Alt and hover between both layers. That's Option in the Mac and click. It will unclip it. Now it's affecting the 2 models. Now this works fine unless we decide to move the model to a new location, and maybe you want to move this one back a little bit. Notice how now the adjustment is not affecting this model. You can see that here. It's affecting the original areas that we selected. So obviously a mask wouldn't work. And this is where the Photoshop trick that I want to show you comes into play. If you click on the group, you'll see that the blending mode by default is pass through. That means that any adjustments that are made in this layer will go through to anything below it. If we simply switch the pass-through blending mode to normal, you'll see that this adjustment layer will only affect the contents of this group. We can add another adjustment layer, for example, a curves adjustment layer, and I'm going to make an extreme adjustment here so that you can see how it works. Notice how this adjustment only affected the layers below it, and I can add as many adjustment layers as I want, and that adjustment layer will only affect the contents of the group simply by setting the group to normal. Remember, default is pass through, which makes it so that the adjustment layers inside affect everything below it. Normal only makes the adjustment layers affect the contents of that group. And to kind of give you an idea of how this works, I'm going to duplicate the group. I'm going to click on it and press Ctrl-J, Command-J on the Mac. Then I'm going to disable the one at the bottom. And I'm just going to press Ctrl-E, Command-E on the Mac, and that will merge the group onto one layer. Notice that this is a single layer now, and it's set to normal. That's sort of what the blending mode does. It sort of flattens everything. Obviously, with the group set to normal, you're working non-destructively, you're not flattening anything, and you have the ability to edit the adjustment layers and move the contents around. I'm going to delete the woman copy here and just keep the group. And I know that some of you may be thinking, well, another way of solving this issue might be by adding the adjustments outside of the group, selecting them all, and pressing Control-Alt-G, Command-Option-G on the Mac, to turn those layers into a clipping mask for the group. And that certainly works. But if you're running Photoshop CS5 or earlier, you cannot clip adjustment layers onto a group. Also, in my opinion, this is very unorganized. And if you wanted to keep things organized, you would need to put those into yet another group. And at least in my opinion, this creates a whole bunch of clutter. So I'm going to go ahead and undo these changes. And I prefer to have everything inside of a group with the blend mode set to normal. And it makes things a lot more organized and easier to work with. In the next trick, I'm going to show you how to create a saturation map using a selective color adjustment layer. This trick will help you composite objects into a scene by matching the saturation of each object. And by the way, this composite is simply a personal project I created just for fun. It's based on the movie The Jungle Book. If you want to find out more about how it was created or see what stock images were used to create this composite, then you can check out my Behance page, behance.net/JRFromPTC. There's going to be a link to it right below this video. Anyway, this is a flattened version, sort of flattened version. The real composite, as you can see, has a whole bunch of layers. But for this example, we're just going to focus on a few layers to make things easier to understand. When you're compositing, you have to match a lot of things. You have to match lighting, luminance values, colors, and of course, saturation. If you look at this image here, you can see that the background has a lot more saturation than the bear here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to disable this child layer, and we're just going to focus on the bear and the background. So if you want to match the saturation of two things, you can use the saturation map to determine the saturation of the items in your scene. To create a saturation map, you can create a new selective color adjustment layer. Now click and drag that layer and put it above everything else. Then make sure that absolute is selected. Then select red and slide the black slider all the way to the left till -100. Do the same thing for all the other colors. Then, with the whites, neutrals, and blacks, slide the black slider all the way to the right to +100. And this creates your saturation map. Anything that is black or dark has no or little saturation. Anything that is white or bright has a lot of saturation. So in this scene, you can see that the bear does not have a lot of saturation compared to the background. If I disable the selective color adjustment layer, and we'll just call this saturation map, you can see that that's true. The bear has little saturation and the background has a lot of it. If we click on the bear layer and add a hue and saturation adjustment layer and click on the clipping mask icon here so that this adjustment layer only affects the layer below it, you can see that if we decrease the saturation down to -100 so that the bear layer has no saturation, notice that the saturation map now shows the bear being completely black. If I click and drag this all the way to the right, the bear is very bright because it has a lot of saturation. Let me disable the saturation map so you can see how that looks. You can see the bear is highly saturated there, and on the other side is black and white. And by the way, the reason it doesn't look black and white and you see a little bit of color is because we have some adjustment layers here. So if I disable these adjustment layers that sort of color the image, you can see it better. So there it is. The bear is black and white. So I'm going to enable the saturation map again. So when you're compositing, you want to match the saturation of the items in your image so that it looks cohesive. So what you would do in this scenario is just add as much saturation as needed so that the bear matches the background. So then you're sort of looking at the luminance values here and sort of making them match. So maybe right about this level here, the bear will match the background. I'm going to disable the saturation map and you will see. So this is before and this is after. Now you can actually apply a hue and saturation adjustment layer to both the foreground and background. Have this new hue and saturation layer only affect the layer below it. Enable the saturation map again. And maybe the image is too saturated, so I would bring the saturation down of the background. And then click on the hue and saturation adjustment layer that controls the bear layer and bring that saturation down as well, and try to match the grays of the bear with the grays around the area that he's sitting in. So maybe something like that. So I will disable my saturation map, and that looks much better. So this is before, and this is after. Now, you don't have to create a saturation map every single time you're compositing. You can just create it once and then click on the flyout menu and choose Save Selected Color Preset, and you can call it Saturation Map. It will appear under the preset list. Notice that I have one created already. And by the way, this trick and the previous trick are two tricks that I showed in my upcoming compositing training course. If you're interested in the training course, look at the description. There is a link to it there. This Photoshop trick deals with blend modes, the special 8 blend modes, and these are it right here. Color burn, linear burn, color dodge, linear dodge add, vivid light, linear light, hard mix, and difference. These special 8 blend modes react differently when you bring down the fill or the opacity. All the other blend modes are the same when you adjust either of these two sliders. To show you how this works, I'm going to first show you one of the tips in my last 5 Photoshop tips that you probably didn't know video. And I think I'll do a better job illustrating it this time, since a lot of people seemed a little confused as to what that tip really was. So I'll show you that tip again, and then I'll show you how it relates to the tip I'm showing you now. So I'm going to create a new layer, and I'm going to paint with white to create a specular highlight on this coin. And by the way, this is a coin that I did for a tutorial. If you want to know how to create this from scratch in Photoshop, just check out my tutorial here on YouTube. I'm going to put a link to it on the description. So I'm just going to paint with white using my brush tool, and actually I'm going to make that a little bit wider in the center, so something like that. It's in its own layer. And the tip that I showed last time was that by setting a layer with white to linear dodge, then double clicking on the side of the layer to bring up the layer style panel, you can make this look like a specular highlight by unchecking transparency shapes layer. Notice the difference. That's before and that's after. So this checkbox makes this blend mode and the other 7 special blend modes behave differently. So that was the tip that I showed in the last video. The tip I'm showing in this video is that opacity and fill work differently with those blend modes. So if I bring down the opacity, you'll see how that's affected. We're here at 54%, and notice what that looks like. It looks a little flat. It doesn't look as bright as it did before. But if I bring down the fill, notice the difference. And we're at 55%, which is pretty close to what we had before, but look at the difference. You can still see some of that hot light is just not as bright. So when you're working with these 8 blend modes, adjusting the opacity and fill give you different results. And just so you know, the opacity and fill here are the same sliders as the ones that you saw inside of the blending options in the layer style panel. Notice that when I drag the fill opacity down here to 35%, 35% is shown here on the side. So you can make your adjustments here if you want to. So just remember that by using any one of these 8 blend modes, you can adjust the opacity and fill and get different results, and also check the transparency shapes layers checkbox so that you get a different blend. And usually unchecking this checkbox gives you a better blend. The next Photoshop trick deals with paths and patterns. So we all know what a pattern is. I'm going to go ahead and create a new pattern adjustment layer just to show you what a pattern is. Photoshop comes with patterns. This is the default list, and there's more that you can choose from if you choose on this flyout menu and select any one of these sets of patterns. But anyway, they're all essentially the same. You have a pattern, you can scale it, and you can also click and drag it around to place it anywhere on your canvas. Now, what you probably don't know is that you can actually fill a path with a pattern. So let me show you how that works. I'm going to create a path by clicking on the pen tool and selecting path here in the options bar, and I'm just going to create a path. And I'm going to press on the escape key when I'm done. And that's my path right there. You can go into window, path, to bring up your paths panel, and you can see it right there. There it is. I'm going to go back into the layers panel and create a new blank pixel layer. And I'm going to go into Edit, Fill, and under Contents, select Pattern. Then you can check on the script here and select Place Along Path. Then you can choose any pattern you like. So maybe we can select something similar to the one we were using before in the example. I think it was that one right there. And then press OK. In this window, you're going to get to see a preview of how that pattern is going to be placed along that path. So you can scale that pattern. You can increase or decrease the spacing. You can also adjust the angle of the pattern, the distance from the path. So notice how now it's spreading apart. And if you uncheck alternate patterns, all the patterns move to one side. You can also add color randomness to your patterns if you like, and brightness randomness. I'm going to press OK. Now notice that the scale is so much bigger than we saw in the preview, so you got to keep that in mind, that things don't look exactly as they do in the preview. And this is actually half of the tip. The other half is that you can take advantage of this knowledge and create new patterns to help you with your design work. So for example, you can create a custom shape and select something like the cat paw print, and maybe add some colors and styles to it. So I'm going to double click on the side of the layer here to bring up the layer style panel, and maybe add a bevel and emboss and maybe a color overlay. And the color will be maybe brown. And the bevel and emboss is facing down. Maybe I'll increase the size a little bit, maybe something like this. Maybe add a little bit of texture. And an outer glow that we'll set to normal and choose black as our color, and increase the opacity a little bit and the size a little bit. So there you go. That's our paw print right there. Now I can select the marquee tool, make a selection around that paw print, disable the background layer so we have transparency, and go into Edit, Define Pattern. And we can call this pattern paw print. Then hit enter or press OK. And I'm going to deselect that selection by pressing Control D, Command D on the Mac. I'm going to disable that layer, enable the background, and create a new blank layer. I'm going to make sure that my path is selected. And in that blank layer, I'm going to go into Edit, Fill, and this time I'm going to choose a different pattern. And that's going to be the paw that we created. Then I'm going to press OK. That's going to bring up that same window, and you get a preview of the pattern following that path. You can maybe add a little bit more spacing to that, bring the scale down a little bit, and press OK and see what you have. And there you go. We have these paw prints that are following that path. Obviously, the turn here is a little sharp, and the paw prints need to be a little bit closer to the path. So I'm just going to undo that, Control-Alt-Z, Command-Option-Z on the Mac, and go back into Edit, Fill, and press OK. Now I'm going to bring the paw prints closer to the path. And maybe increase the spacing just a little bit. And maybe decrease the scale a little bit as well. And press OK. So that looks much better. And that's how you will go about filling paths with custom patterns that you create. Now, don't let this little silly example fool you. This could be a really powerful technique. You just got to be creative with the patterns that you create and how you're going to use them along a path. In the next trick, I'm going to show you how you can take all these adjustment layers and turn them into one single adjustment that can apply this very same effect to any other image that you want. Each one of these layers helps to apply the overall effect that you see here. So this is before and this is after. Notice that some of these layers have different blend modes. This one's a color blend mode, this one's the luminosity blend mode, and the others are the normal blend mode. And what we want to do is we want to be able to apply one adjustment layer that creates this very same effect. But before I show you how to do that, I'm going to make this background layer into a regular layer. So I'm going to double click on the padlock here. And the reason I'm doing this is so that the tip I'm about to show you doesn't work the first time we try it, in case you run into that problem. So I'm going to go into File, Export, Color Lookup Tables. And immediately Photoshop is going to tell me that I need a background layer for this to work. So if you don't have a background layer, select the layer at the very bottom, then go into Layer, New, Background from Layer. And that turns it into a background. Then you can go into File, Export, Color Lookup Tables. I'm going to use a cube format, so make sure that cube is selected, and I'm going to press OK. Then you can name your lookup table file. I'm just going to leave it at default, which is the name of the document that I'm working with. Then I'm going to click on Save. Then I'm going to create a new Color Lookup Adjustment layer. I'm going to click on Load LUT, the first option here. It's going to open up a window and find the file that you just created in your computer. For me, it's right here. There it is. I'm going to click on Load. Photoshop is going to take a second here and it's going to load that file. Notice that right now the effect is a little too strong, and that's because we have the original adjustments and we have the color lookup table layer that we just brought in. But if I disable the adjustment folder here, you'll see that the effect that we created earlier has been replicated by one single adjustment layer, a color lookup adjustment layer. So this is with the single layer that we created, and this is with all those other layers. Notice that it's exactly the same thing. So just keep in mind that if you applied a color effect to an image using multiple adjustment layers, you can always export that as a single color lookup table, and you can apply that same effect by using one single layer. Of course, with a color lookup adjustment layer, you have opacity and you have different blend modes that you can use. Unfortunately, you cannot edit the color lookup adjustment layer, so if you want to make any edits, you would have to go back into the original adjustments and edit the layers from there. And I also want to point out that the file that we created, the lookup table file that we created, could be imported into any other application that uses LUT files. So applications like Adobe Premiere, Adobe After Effects, and Adobe SpeedGrade. So you can apply this color effect to your video files as well. And those were the 5 Photoshop tricks you did not know, probably. Now, before I let you go, I want to show you 2 extra Easter eggs. They won't necessarily help you out in your workflow, but they will make you really cool around the office. There are 2 Easter eggs that Photoshop has: toast and bananas. First, I'll show you the toast. If you go into Edit, Preferences, or in the Mac, you need to go into the Photoshop menu and Preferences, or you can press Control-K, Command-K on the Mac to bring up the Preferences panel. You can click on Interface, and you can select the color theme. The Easter egg is if you hold Alt-Shift, Option-Shift on the Mac, and click, the icons turn into toast. So we have white bread, and we have different shades of toast. So that's how you get toast with Photoshop. I'm going to press Cancel, and I'm going to show you now how to get bananas with Photoshop. In Photoshop CC 2015, you got the ability to edit the Photoshop toolbar. So if you open up the Photoshop toolbar editor by clicking on these 3-dot icon and then clicking on Edit Toolbar, or by going into Edit, Toolbar, you bring up the customizable toolbar menu here. If you hold Shift and click on Done, notice what happens to the icon here. It turns into a banana. So maybe you can go to your friend's computer and turn his icon into a banana and freak him out. And that's it. I really hope that you enjoy these Photoshop tricks. And I also hope that you enjoy the 2 Easter eggs. Let me know in the comments below how many of these tricks were new to you and how many you knew already. Also, don't forget to check out my Behance page, my Instagram page, and if you're interested in my upcoming compositing course, check out the links right in the description. And that's it for this tutorial. I hope that you enjoyed it and that you learned something new. If you have any comments or questions, leave them down below. If you enjoyed the tutorial, don't forget to click that like button and share this video with a friend. If you haven't already, subscribe to the Photoshop training channel now. Thank you for watching, and I'll talk to you again soon.